Welcome back, everyone. With the crisis still underway in Iraq and Syria, the U.S. is facing a major national security threat as Americans continue to fight for ISIS.
We have Congressman of the 52nd District, Scott Peters, with us this morning. Of course, he is running for re-election in 3 weeks. He's talking about his new bill that would ensure the safety of Americans from terrorists, at least help along that direction. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
First of all, this is called the Treason and Passport Revocation Act. Tell us what it is.
Well, you know, this is ISIS poses, as everyone by now knows, a substantial new threat. They're much more better trained, much more lethal, even than Al-Qaeda. And the other thing that they're doing is they're recruiting Westerners. So by most estimates, there's 2,000 people from the West who have gone over to the Middle East to fight alongside these groups. And approximately 200 of those are Americans. And one of the problems is when they come back and they have an American passport, they can move all over the country, even though they're now our enemy, and do real damage. Mm-hmm. And so what this bill does is it creates an understanding that we are at war with these folks, so that your affiliation with these kinds of groups is treason, and it gives the Secretary of State additional powers to revoke these passports, and actually requires that the passports be revoked if people have been affiliated with these groups.
According to Duncan Hunter, he went on record, I think it was a week or so ago, saying that people have been coming across the border in Mexico who have worked with ISIS or affiliated with ISIS. So if that's the case, and taking your bill into consideration, how do we keep them from doing that? How do we stop them?
Well, I don't know that those, I think the Homeland Security was looking for some substantiation.
Sure, and that's why I said
if
that did happen.
Obviously in any border, this is the same thing. So with respect to passports, I mean, this is one thing you want to make sure you do. You want to have the ability for the Secretary of State to treat these people as if we are at war, as if they are committing treason. And then with respect to security, obviously at our airports, at our borders, everywhere there's a concern that we ought to be making sure that these folks aren't getting in and aren't able to do the kind of damage that they've actually promised that they will do once they get their foothold in the Middle East.
What does the current law say? Because the Secretary of State has the right to revoke these passports, but it's not required. And then the treason end of it is not in law.
And remember, that's what it is, Dave. And the problem is now, you know, we've set up the definition of war based on the wars of the teens and the 30s and the 40s, right? Where you have one state declaring war against another state. We're not really fighting against a country here. We're fighting against a very well-organized terrorist organization, maybe much more dangerous than many countries, but it's not the traditional war profile that we've seen. So what we would do is basically create an understanding in the law that this is war, and that if you're fighting on the other side, that's an act of treason.
Yeah, it takes treason to a whole different level, doesn't it?
Right. You can prosecute that in federal courts. That is, in and of itself, it's a crime in the United States.
If we're not aware of the Americans who are going over there to fight and they want to get back into the country, how do we stop them? How do we know?
Well, there's pretty good tracking of them. I think that's one of the things that, again, the passport gives the ability to do is once you have a passport, you can track where these folks are. Mm-hmm. I believe that our intelligence agencies have eyes on these folks and are making sure that if they do try to come back, that not only do we stop them, but we apprehend them. And that's the idea of this. This gives some tools that we don't have today to catch these people as they come in and make sure they don't do damage in the homeland.
Yeah, this would be one tool in the strategy. While you're here, let's talk about the overall strategy going on. There's a lot of defense folks that are going to be talking in Washington from 20 different countries today. Your take on what these airstrikes are actually doing? Because some people say they are slowing things down. Other people say it's not really helping.
Well, first, back up. I want to say how good it is that 20 countries are talking about this. It's not just the United States carrying this burden. I mean, first of all, we understand that from the beginning, the whole strategy starts with political stability in Iraq. There has to be a government there that can hold things together. The United States can't do that, and that's been a problem over the last decade. Second is we need allies in the region. There are allies in the region who are just as concerned about this threat as we are, and they need to be on the ground. They need to be carrying some of this burden as well. We need international allies, and that's why I'm saying, you know, we know France was one of the first to step in. They have 700 people with French passports fighting this fight on the other side, and they're very concerned. And then I thought the airstrikes was appropriate. It's not the end game. It's what we need to do in the immediate term to make sure that we stop this advance. And obviously it's not perfect, but I think it's an important part of the strategy. And then something that we voted on before we left was the ability to train and equip Syrian rebels, people in Syria who would provide some boots on the ground, not American boots on the ground, but provide some resistance because that's what's ultimately going to be needed. And I think the one thing we've learned from the last decade is the limitations of American ground troops. There's only so much we can do. And I'm sorry we had to go through that, but we've learned that lesson, and I don't think we should repeat that again.
I'm curious, President Obama has said several times that he's not going to put any boots on the ground, but just for your opinion, do you think that will change?
Well, I don't believe that that's the intent right now, Brandy. I think that to the extent that there's any more consideration of that, it will have to come to Congress. I think a lot of us have been concerned that the President has not been working as closely with Congress as he could be. I think in the last round of votes, he did. I give him credit for that. But really, we're listening to the commanders. They have not recommended it right now. If they do, I think Congress should be involved in discussing that and authorizing it.
All right, 3 weeks from today.